Welcome to this episode of Real Leaders Overcoming Real Crap. And I am so excited for you to be able to share this conversation. I was talking with Ron Diamond, the CEO and founder of Diamond Wealth. In the financial industry his whole career, started a hedge fund in his 20s. He's taught at Ivy League schools, really a leader in the field, and shared some incredible wisdom and insights on the softer side of business, on empathy and authenticity. So it's totally my pleasure to be able to have this conversation with Ron, and I know you'll enjoy it. Well, Ron, thank you again for being here. I am so excited to talk with you because you've got this very interesting history and perspective to share. So thank you for sharing your time with us.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
So, Ron, can you describe for us the problem you're trying to solve? This kind of your trajectory in realizing that there was this big gap, how you see it and what you're doing about
As far as raising children or my job,
it. Either or, but more your job for now.
yeah, I'm better at the job stuff. Um, so I work in the family office space. So family office is basically a family who usually they've had a liquidity event, they sold their company, and they've made a lot of money. And usually the dollar amount usually around $250 million or more. So these are very, very wealthy families. And what's happened is you've got huge amounts of money right now in very inefficient hands. So the family office market, there's roughly $10 trillion in capital in family offices. And just to kind of put that in perspective, because it's kind of a big number, there's roughly 6.5 trillion globally in hedge funds, the entire universe. So this is larger than the hedge fund universe. But more interestingly, over the next 20 years, we're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. So there's 105 trillion dollars that's moving downstream from the baby boomers to the next gen. So we're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. And what does that look like? How do you solve for that? And so what we do is we invest alongside about 100 family offices, and we have different divisions, but we try to figure out ways not just to create alpha, which is to make money, but also to solve some of society's problems in the philanthropic endeavor.
Okay. All right. So this is a major chunk of the economy in the United States and
Y-
globally.
Yep.
And the success of the people managing this money and how strategic they are makes a huge difference in how healthy our economy and small businesses are.
Yeah, it's still early in the evolution of family offices. I mean, 68% of the family offices that exist started since 2000 and half since 2008. So it is a relatively new industry. But it's a very important industry because A, it's going to fundamentally change the way companies are financed going forward.
Mhm.
But B, kind of my North Star, it's also going to fundamentally change the way a lot of these real world problems are solved. So, for example, my father passed from prostate cancer when he was 57. My first boss was Michael Milken when I was at Drexel Burnham. Uh, Michael Milken also developed prostate cancer. What my dad did is what most people would do is went to two, three, four doctors and got the best opinions and did everything he could, and he survived for 4 years and then he passed away. What Milken did is rather than just give $100 million to the American Cancer Society, he kind of built it like a venture capital firm. And he put 2 million here, 500,000 here, 3 million here. And some of these are crazy ideas. Some of them are a little more, more studied. But because of him, most men will die with, but not of prostate cancer. And then you look at what Bill Gates did during COVID, I would argue he did more than the US government. And then Eric Lefkowski, who's the founder of Groupon, his wife got breast cancer. So in order to help his wife to solve it, um, he didn't like the data he saw. So he started doing research. And as a result of the research, he started a company called Tempus, which is now a multi-billion dollar company and publicly traded. He wasn't trying to make money. He was trying to solve a problem. So to me, my North Star is if you could take these entrepreneurs with almost unlimited resources and they could take the passion, whatever it is, autism, poverty, women's rights, whatever. Um, I don't think it's going to come from the government. I don't think it's going to come from corporate. And I don't think the family offices are a panacea, but I think we're going to be able to solve a lot of these problems. And I think it's really important because unfortunately we've got a lot of problems.
So it sounds like there have been a lot of disparate efforts from to solve some of our communities and our country's toughest problems, and family offices are emerging as a huge source for solving some of these really tough problems. They've got some successes and momentum, but they have been operating largely independently, just trying to figure stuff out on their own, right?
Correct. In
So,
general, yes, they're very fragmented. It's very inefficient today, and it's quite siloed.
okay, okay. So when you say you invest alongside and with them, how do you do that? What does that look like?
Basically, I put together a syndicate. So we've got 100 families that we invest with, and these are families anywhere between 250 million up to 30 billion. I put in some money, they put in a lot of money. We structure a deal, and we're typically better able to get better economics because if somebody's raising 50 million and we could take the full 50 million, we're going to get better economics than if we just invest 1 or 2 million.
Okay, all right. And you're kind of advising them on yes,
Yeah,
okay.
but we're not a, it's not a firm. I'm doing this as a way to take my capital. I'm investing my own capital. So it's really a way, we don't charge anything. It's a way for me to take a finite amount of capital and deploy it as if it's much more. So I want to be the first call if Google is going public, I want to be that call. I don't have enough capital to be that first call. Now
Right.
I do.
Okay. All right. Very cool. This is really interesting. So, Ron, can you give us an idea about your path that got you here?
It was very serendipitous. I started my career at Drexel Burnham, it was the most profitable firm on Wall Street. This was with Michael Milken and junk bonds, and this was the alphas of the alphas. Um, I got the job. I graduated from college, and 2 years after I got the job, the firm went bankrupt. And this was when Rudy Giuliani tried to become political and helped to get all a whole bunch of things happen, a confluence of things happen. And I'm in the room with people in their 50s and 60s and 70s, typically white men, openly crying. In the early 90s in Wall Street, white men didn't do that. But they did there. And my takeaway from that was that it was a surreal scene. I remember what people were wearing. I remember some of the women's what their voices. I remember fragrances. I could remember it was a very pivotal point in my life. My takeaway was that I would always be loyal to people, but never to a company. Because if this can happen to Drexel, this can happen to anybody.
Right.
So I was planning on staying at Drexel. I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur, but I was quite disillusioned.
Mm.
So I came back to Chicago and started a hedge fund. But it was a result of the fact that Drexel went bankrupt and I was disillusioned. It was not my initial plan.
Okay. Interesting. Sometimes the most important lessons we learn through that kind of adversity or catastrophes and what we realize we don't want. And I think that shapes a lot of us in what we do with our careers. And you found this niche now that you're really passionate about, but you've been in a tough industry for pretty much your whole career in the world of Wall Street and finance and investments. So can you tell us about one or two of the hardest things that you've been through or had to overcome in that industry in your career?
Well, certainly I mean, the most challenging was from the get-go when Drexel Burnham went bankrupt. Um, Second was probably, I came in and I started a hedge fund and I didn't truly know what I was fairly smart and I was pretty good at economics and I understood the stock market, but I was way underqualified to start my own company. So I did it and, made a lot of mistakes along the way. Did some things right, but I learned a lot. And I think what's hard is, um, when you're starting out, I think that I certainly, and I think most younger people are a little bit myopic and they're trying to like get stuff. They want to get stuff. If I'm trying to raise money for a hedge fund, I want you to invest in my hedge fund. And what I found as I've gotten older is it's more important to give than to get. And I can't tell you why. I don't know if it's a cosmic thing in the universe, but the more I give, the more that I get. And that's something that I didn't think when I was younger, but I know for a fact it's true.
Interesting. So I think that, and in my experience, that aligns with what I've seen with a lot of very successful people is we have something in our heart that we want to give, we want to contribute to the world around us. And when we're true to that and we're passionate about that, then it's sort of like the universe gives us all these opportunities. But our first drive is service and helping other people and giving back. And then it seems like wealth and success follows that.
Correct, but it's a hard thing to tell somebody when they're 22 years old and they're just getting started. But yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have built and grown teams and companies, and the old adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's we usually have great goals and plans, and then it's the people side, the friction, disengagement, dysfunction, conflict, drama. So, do you have any examples of that you can share as you've been trying to develop high performing teams? What has been some of that dysfunction, and how did you overcome it?
Well, we deal with some of the I mean, I invest alongside some of the wealthiest families in the world. And, you know, I wouldn't say there's a direct correlation, but the wealthier they are, a lot of times the more dysfunctional the family is because there's a whole bunch of different variables that go into it. So it's a very interesting psychological dynamic dealing with these families. I think that the way I look at it is, the I've got two daughters, beautiful daughters, 21 and 24. Um, you want to raise kids that are grateful. You don't want to raise kids that are entitled. That's the worst thing you can do. And one of the things I see with a lot of these families who, they have everything, their kids fly private and they stay in the nicest hotels and they have tutors for everything. Um, how do you rate, raising kids that are grateful and not entitled? And I think that comes from kids are sponges. And I could tell my kids don't smoke cigarettes, but if they see me smoking cigarettes, I'm a hypocrite, right? I could tell them to be philanthropic, but if they never see me writing a check, that doesn't do anything. They watch what you do, even when they're 5 years old, and they see you. So it's what you do, not what you say. And kids learn and listen. And to create culture is really just act what's true to you. And your kids in general will follow through. But I think also in the companies that you build, people follow you. I mean, people listen to you. It's not what you do when they're in front of you. It's what you do when they're not around you.
Mm.
And, I'd like to think that, you know, it's important. It's very important. There's 8 billion people in the world. But at the end of the day, we're all in this together and we're trying to figure stuff out. And I just think it's important to be helpful. And you know, everybody has different issues that they're going through. And I think to create a good culture is to create something, a positive atmosphere, but one of empathy and one where people know that if somebody comes to me with a problem, I might not be able to solve it, but I certainly will be concerned about it and do whatever I can to do it. And that's probably a little different than I was when I was younger.
Yeah, absolutely. There's research coming out and all these articles in Forbes and Harvard Business Review that are saying, what do you know? Empathy is really important to leadership. Wow, who would have thought? Research is showing that empathy is important. And
Or vulnerable, I when I was in, Brene Brown, I've studied, she on vulnerability. I mean, I used to think vulnerability was a weakness.
right.
It's actually a strength.
Mhm.
But that's not the way we're trained.
Right. Yeah, we're often kind of programmed as leaders by other people that have led us. We're programmed to think that we have to always have this front, that we have all the answers. We're confident. We know what we're doing. We're invulnerable when actually that's eroding trust and it disempowers other people. It turns other people away from us. But there's this whole cultural shift happening where we're finally waking up and realizing I can be human and vulnerable, and that actually works much better.
The best compliment I ever received after I speak a lot, um, was after I spoke one time, somebody came up to me and said, that was really authentic. And I didn't really take it as a compliment, but then the next day I thought about it. I'm like, that's a big compliment.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's because I've never said anything that enlightening. But I think that people like it and can tell if you're authentic, and I think it's a really important thing in business. And I think we're at a bit of an inflection point. There's if you look at my generation versus my kids' generation, there's never been a bigger change. I would go back all the way to the Industrial Revolution. I had a typewriter. My kids have access to these phones and they get information. They have the internet. I had the Encyclopedia Britannica. The change has happened so rapidly, and now with AI coming into fruition, it's going to continue to accelerate. So I think technology is accelerating faster than we are able to cope with it.
Yeah.
And I think the leaders who are able to do best are able to are the ones really that people could view as authentic and they're real people. And that's also
Mhm.
true with people in general. So I think that it's a really important thing that more and more companies and people are learning and focusing on.
Well, it takes a lot of courage to be authentic, right? And to admit I didn't always know the answers. I made a lot of mistakes. And I think in today's world, people are so overstimulated with information and media and being right and wanting to be right and have all the answers and look smart. It's almost harder for us to have that courage sometimes.
Yeah, when I was young, it's a good point. I mean, when I was younger, I would almost never use the phrase, I don't know. Now I use that phrase a lot. But if I don't know, I don't know. And it's fine. I know, I know a lot less than I know. And it's okay to say I don't know. But that's authentic.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's interesting. You're kind of comparing some of what you've learned in leading and building companies and teams with parenting. And a lot of the work that it takes and the practices that we implement to make other humans successful are what we practice as parents. And then we apply some of those principles to emerging professionals that we are empowering and we're growing and developing. So, can you tell me a little bit more from your personal experience in growing a high performing team? What have you figured out when it comes to truly growing and developing people, making them more skilled and more competent? What have been some of the barriers, and what have been some of the lessons that you've learned as you've done this?
Well, I think the quote from Shakespeare, "Be true to thyself." I think that if you're authentic and you're true to yourself, that it starts with you, and then it goes out, not the other way around. And you can't be perfect to everybody, and you can't always please everybody. But as long as people understand where you're coming from, where your moral compass is, what's on your radar and how you view things, as long as people realize that you're fair, you don't know all the answers, but you're thoughtful, and if you don't know the answer, you'll research it. I think that's a really important thing, and people could tell. I mean, I really don't like arrogant people. I really don't. And I didn't realize that when I was younger. I don't like that person, and I didn't understand why.
Mhm.
But I don't need somebody to tell me within 5 minutes of a conversation 10 accomplishment. I would rather know like what's going on with their kids and where are they from and what do they like to do for fun.
Yeah, yeah. I'm from the Midwest, and my grandfather used to say, "An ounce of pretension is worth a pound of crap." I think often people put up fronts. They're trying to look good because they're insecure. And I'm seeing a lot of the companies I work with, there's this need to be right and look good over actually being good and doing the right thing, right? And people seem very caught up in that right now.
I think that's very true, and I think you're starting to see a fundamental shift in society where, the top leaders are not the ones who are pounding their chest talking about "do as I do," but they're the ones that have empathy. They're the ones that have sympathy. They're the ones that put together a good culture, which wasn't that important maybe 50 years ago, or it was important, but it wasn't really taught 50 years ago. But it's very, very important.
Right, right. And that's a good bridge, Ron. I wanted to ask you about what do you think makes someone a bad boss or a bad leader? And can you fix that? Can you fix a bad boss?
It's a good question. If they could fix themselves, if you could fix yourself, you can fix a bad boss. I mean, so usually a bad boss is just a bad person, I think. I think that, if you're micromanaging everybody, you have to think a little deeper. Why are you doing that? It's probably because you're insecure,
Hmm.
right? So if you're more secure, you let people do it. And you also need to let people grow and make mistakes and learn. And, for me, it's more enjoyable for me to see people under me or my children thrive and succeed than any good thing that happens to me. That to me, um, that's my North Star. I love seeing younger people succeed and thrive and grow and learn. Um, there's nothing better than that.
Well, that is a total loss of ego, what you're describing, right? It's like what
Ego
you're
is the biggest competitor most people have is certainly in the world that I live in, which is a world of, billionaires.
Mhm.
The biggest competitor is their own ego.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of miserable billionaires.
Mhm.
I know a lot of very happy ones too. But the ego, I think, will be studied a lot more. Um, I think that it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you need to have an ego
Right.
to go forward and to make it and to start a company or grow a business. But I used to think that, people who would like pound their chest, they're the ones that are the ones that have the ones with the big egos are actually the ones that admit they're wrong, the ones that say they don't know, which is flipped from what I thought when I was younger. So,
Right.
I'm constantly growing. We're all constantly growing, and what I try to do is listen. And one of the things we people are not good at is listening, that we're ready to answer the question before knowing what we're going to say, before we fully listen to everything. And I think it's a really good, important thing for younger people to just not just listen to tell the answer, but just truly listen
Hmm.
and just don't talk. You
Yeah.
learn a lot.
Yeah. Listen with a genuine interest in truly understanding, which is different, right? It's a skill, and if you just look at rhetoric today and political rhetoric debates, are people listening? Are they really trying to understand? Or are we all just all up in our egos, right? And what has been really interesting to me too, Ron, is the concept of the ego comes from Carl Jung. And his life purpose, his whole mission was trying to understand human dysfunction and why we do things that are counterintuitive to what we want, right? And this self-induced suffering that we all have. And so when you think about people with unhealthy egos, where they're actually insecure, so they try to look like they know everything and they're always right. Usually, what ends up happening is they end up the dumbest, wrongest person in the room because they're so insistent on being right and looking right that they lose track of actual reality. It's so ironic. And I see this with leaders that are trying to do big, ambitious things, but they cling to this need to be right because of their egos.
My dad was a banker, and he used to tell me he could always tell who the lawyers were because the lawyers would always come into a meeting and they would try to show that they're the smartest person in the room. The entrepreneurs would come into the meeting and they would try to find the smartest person in the room. That's that's kind of what I look at myself. I try to surround myself with people smarter than me. I mean, I taught courses at Harvard and Stanford, and I work with multi-billionaires. I'm many instances I'm the dumbest and the poorest person in the room, um, but I'm fine with that. It's
Yeah,
okay.
right. That makes for an interesting life. You have more to share,
It
right?
makes for an interesting life. And again, if you have an ego, if you're this is a whole different discussion. This is probably a whole different topic. But yeah, I think that with you have to be able to understand yourself, understand your ego. Um, in order because nobody wants to be the dumbest guy in the room. I actually do. I want to learn from people that are smarter than me. I'm totally fine with learning from people that are smarter than me. And I think that that's not something I felt when I was younger.
Yeah. It's kind of a paradox because I'm sitting here talking to one of the most wise and successful people in the United States, probably. Ron, I would say that would
Thanks.
categorize you by most people's standards of you've taught courses at Ivy League schools, right? You're highly successful. You see things at a whole nother level, and yet one of your mantras is to be the dumbest person in the room. It's a paradox that's pretty brilliant. I love
I've gotten quite good at it actually.
it. So, and that actually brings me to the last question I wanted to ask you about is you're seeing these cultural and economic changes happening very rapidly with technology, with our economy, with the way that people are and what people want in the world. And what do you see as this next wave of leadership principles that we all need to embody as leaders in the economy right now in order to be successful in the economy that will be in 20 years? What do you see as one or two guiding principles that we really need to start focusing on and living by?
It's a great question. I mean, look, I think th this thing, is going to be the smoking of this generation. My kids grew up, they're 21 and 24. They grew up with these phones in their hands.
Mhm.
And we didn't realize how bad social media could be for them. I think the average kid spends 7 or 8 hours a day on the phone,
Wow.
um, scrolling through different things. Um, it's terrible. And I think that you need to get out more. I think that there's going to be a backlash against this. I think that, the amount of depression and anxiety and suicide amongst kids 18 to 25 is off the charts.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of it has to do, it's not all, but a lot of it has to do with social media. Um, we're on a Zoom call right now, which is terrific. It's better than being on a phone call, but it's much better to be in person. And people substitute like, well, I don't need to meet you in person because we've already seen each other. It's different. Human beings we're not wired to be independent. We're not wired to um, be isolated. And when a 25-year-old thinks they've got it made because they get to work in their pajamas, I think of nothing worse because when you're starting out your career, you learn through osmosis, you learn from listening to
Mhm.
people, you learn not from a specific talk, but overhearing things and seeing how people react. And that's really what people are missing. And I think you're going to see I think you're going to see a pushback. I don't think people will come back to the offices 100% of the time. In an ideal world, I think they would. They won't. But I think you'll see a bigger pushback for people to come back to the office more because particularly for younger people, I mean, I don't need to be in the office every day, but when I was 25 years old, I did. I needed to learn and I needed to absorb. And it was really important. And I think we're missing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like as our time interfacing with technology is ramping up, you feel like our time interfacing as humans needs to ramp up.
Without question, we're social animals. We are. And we people don't kids aren't having as much sex. Kids aren't dating as much many people in college. People aren't hanging out with their friends or scrolling on their phone.
Yeah.
And it's not to me, it's just not natural.
Right.
Everything's programmed. So when I came home from school, if there are 6 kids, I'd go out and play football. If there are 4 kids, I'd play basketball. 1 or 2 kids, I'd play baseball. Now kids just go to their phones, and
Right.
I don't have the structure that all these kids are totally structured right now. Um, I just don't think I don't think it's a good way to live life, and I think there will be a big pushback with it. I think it's a very, very hard thing to be a kid today, to
Yeah.
be in high school or in college or just graduating. I did well in school, and if I didn't get into Northwestern, I would have been fine going to Illinois or Wisconsin or another good school. There's so much stress and pressure on these kids today that if they start worrying about their SATs when they're in fourth grade, I didn't even know what an SAT was until I was a sophomore in high school. So I just think it's a different world, and a lot of it falls on the parents.
Right. Right. So you see in the future the pendulum swinging back to more emphasis on more authentic human interaction, more of those soft skills, as they're called.
I sure as hell hope so.
So Ron, for someone emerging in your field and financial world, and trying to do big things with this changing economy, what would be your parting words of wisdom to an emerging leader or you 15, 20, 30 years ago?
To my 20-year-old self, just be authentic and be honest. And I think that people who succeed, everything's about a relationship. I mean, don't be so transactional. Look at things as a relationship and don't worry about how things look in 1 to 5 or 10 weeks. Think about how things are going to come out in 5 or 10 years. And if you go into relationships and situations with that mindset, I think you're typically going to come out with better results.
Love it. Well, Ron, this has been such a joy to talk with you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.